My name is Garrett, and this took place when I was a sophomore in college. When I didn't get a dorm after freshman year, I scrambled for off-campus housing. Long story short, I ended up in a co-op part of a three-housey community that was sort of near campus. But not really. It wasn't ideal, but it was cheap, and I didn't have many options, plus I had a bike. So I didn't really mind the extra travel time. Most of the residents were young students like me, but there were a few exceptions. There were a handful of alumni, 1 or 2 and a few older people getting their degrees later on in life. But the person who immediately stood out to me was an older woman who lived in one of the other houses. From what I could tell, she was maybe in her late 50s, even though she looked a little older than that. She had graying hair and walked with a sort of limp, like she had some kind of back injury. She was really quiet and mostly kept to herself, and she always had this blank expression on her face. I assumed she had some kind of connection to the university, maybe faculty or maybe an alumni, but no one explained, and I didn't ask. The first time I saw her do something strange was in our common kitchen, which was a little weird to begin with because the two other houses had their own kitchen. So I wasn't sure why she'd be hanging out in ours. She wasn't cooking or eating or even talking to anyone. She was just standing there while the rest of us were talking and running around making dinner and listening to music. She didn't try and join in. She just watched us blankly. I caught eyes with her a few times, and part of me got the feeling that she was watching me specifically, even though I knew that was unlikely. No one acknowledged her, which I thought was a little weird too. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Later that week, I was doing some homework in my room when I saw her again. I glanced out my bedroom window, and there she was staring up at me. As if that wasn't strange enough by itself, she wasn't even on the sidewalk, but rather in the middle of the street. It was getting late, and it was decently cold too, so she must have been freezing out. There, I couldn't tell if she was looking into my window or just in the general direction of the house, but I felt like she was staring at me specifically. I don't know why I did it, but I waved at her, trying to be friendly. The moment I did, I instantly regretted it. She didn't wave back. Instead, she jumped up and down a few times like she was excited, and then ran towards one of the other houses, presumably hers. I felt kind of sick. Not only had I acknowledged her, but I had confirmed that she had been looking into my room the entire time, and even if she hadn't, she now knew which room was mine. Later that night, I asked one of my housemates about her. He told me that that woman had always been there, and that I should try my best to ignore her like the rest of them did. I inquired further about her, but the guy genuinely didn't know anything, and said he was just repeating what someone had told him when he moved, and it didn't sit right with me. So I asked around until I got some semblance of an answer. One of the seniors in the specific house she lived in told me that she was associated with the university and was a little kooky, but that she didn't have a history of violence or getting physical. I asked him why no one found that as strange as I did, and he told me that they really couldn't control who lived there, as that decision was up to the property manager. I wasn't fully satisfied with that answer, but there was nothing I could do, so I tried to just block her out of my mind. But then it got worse. One night I walked out of my room and nearly ran into her. She was in the hallway, standing right in front of my door. I literally jumped back because she caught me so off guard. It was past midnight on like a Tuesday, so the house was mostly dead. She didn't say anything when she saw me. She barely even reacted. Instead, she just turned and walked away, as if I were the one who had intruded on her. I'm not going to go into every little detail, but there were several more occurrences like that one where I caught her either snooping somewhere where she had no business being or doing something she had no business doing at some point. I lost my room key. All three houses had once been part of the same hotel, so all the rooms had personal locks and keys. It was a co-op, so most people just left their doors unlocked, but I was someone who couldn't sleep comfortably knowing someone could just walk into my room. So losing my key was a big deal. Everyone had a spare, including me, but I was pissed because I'd have to go make a copy of the key, and that was an extra annoyance I couldn't afford at the time. A few nights later, I woke up randomly in the night. I wasn't sure why at first, but then I heard it. There was a soft bumping. Managed to get her to the grounds, but not before she seriously injured him. The doctor said he was an inch away from needing surgery or dying. Benjamin and I tried to console him, but he was visibly shaken. The last thing he said before we left was that he had learned his lesson about flaunting his money, especially around pretty girls. He moved out not long after. He said he didn't feel safe in that house anymore, and that his ex had tons of friends just like her, and he didn't feel comfortable with the thought that they might have known where he lived. We never saw him again. I pray to God he's doing okay. No one should ever have to go through something like that, especially not someone as young as music. Him when I moved into my new place. I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned: the neighborhood I moved to is really nice, low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses here are really spaced out, which was partially what drew me there, but for some reason the property next to mine is much closer in proximity than most of the other properties are to each other. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought I could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived, their great-grandparents and everything. But I could not have been more wrong. Even though I tried to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to introduce myself to my next-door neighbors. Last, I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children. And yes, they were all slightly intimidating purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't too sure how a younger guy like myself would easily blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern when I got around to meeting my next-door neighbor. My social battery was mostly drained from having spent the day making small talk with strangers. I knew if I just went back home, I was never going to be as motivated to meet them. So I just sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I had gotten accustomed to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a younger-looking dude in a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken to hell. He looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, wow, someone who was born in my decade. What a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting to him about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s among so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about that, and that most of the people who lived here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief for me. He introduced himself as Damon and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, "Hell, why not right now?" To which I expected him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, though, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning his living room, and then he turned back to me saying he wished he could, but he was busy working. I asked him what he did for work, because it just seems like a normal follow-up question to what he said, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said finance, but didn't elaborate any more than that, which I thought was a bit strange. I told him fair enough and asked if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he told me he lived there alone, which was absolutely insane to me given how big the house was. We chitched for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number. Before going back inside, I was excited that someone my age lived here, especially because he seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind my house wasn't even half the size of his anyway. I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing eventful really happened. I texted Damon a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up, but he'd always complained about how busy he was and how sorry he was that we couldn't hang out. Eventually, I gave up with him, not in a hostile way, just in a you do you kind of way. I'm definitely not the type of person to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Damon's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange to me because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and the office in my house is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Damon's property. If you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits, I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was also just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday night, I remember that distinctly. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first I thought I was imagining it, or it was part of a really vivid dream I was having, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were, 7 or so cars lined up in Damon's driveway. There was no mistaking it. He was having a Party now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties. But it was the middle of the week, and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over knock and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party. That much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Damon, but I decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse. The following morning, I knocked on the door again, harder this time, still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer, at least 10 pairs. But there was something off. There was literally no one in there. I moved further, expecting to see people in the living room, maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could hear people over the music that I was playing in the background, though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened to it, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music, really. It was a recording, a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense to me. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house. That much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open, and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down those stairs, with the except of a very faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there. I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door somewhere deeper in the basement. I crept towards it, and as I got closer, I started to pick up on another noise I hadn't been able to hear earlier over the music. It sounded almost mechanical. It was this heavy rhythmic grinding, like heavy machinery or a buzz saw or something. I got a little closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing, and they're looking across the room at something that was out of view. They were all older-looking guys, significantly older than Damon. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes and had on these protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also realized they were wearing what looked like work boots, even though I had seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I would have assumed that they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a few seconds of me just standing there, I started to pick up on this awful bleach smell, or some kind of cleaning solution. That's what did it for me. I started to feel this awful pit in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door behind me. I didn't actually hear the door over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run directly to my house. I jumped my own fence and made it to the backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Damon or any of those other guys know it was me who had been snooping around. I gathered myself and went up to my office, making sure all the lights up there were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked over at Damon's house. There was no one there, but then a few minutes later the front door flew open, and like 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street. But Damon wasn't with them. I could tell, because everyone looked older, like those first guys. I had seen a few of them look like they were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men actually shoved one of the other ones, and I thought they were about to start fighting in the street, but they didn't. Eventually they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no real crime I could actually report. The thing I couldn't understand was how none of my other neighbors had a problem with the loud music, especially since most of them had children. I figured if they had been able to hear it, and I called the police, Damon would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no idea what that was about either. The people I had seen were all wearing boots, so did they bring extra pairs of shoes just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions, and I didn't know what to do, so I just went to bed. The next morning I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Damon's. I went upstairs to try and get some work done, but I couldn't concentrate, and found myself looking over at DD's house every 5 seconds after a few hours of his car not being there. I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to take some low-key glances through his windows. Nothing though. Days passed, and Damon still didn't return, or his car didn't at least. I was baffled with every passing day. I still couldn't figure out how my other neighbors had been able to sleep through all the noises that night. So I just straight up asked them. I went to a few houses and asked them if they had heard the party he had a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about even after I told them which house it was coming from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago. Now the crazy thing is Damon still hasn't returned, and it's clear no one is maintaining his house, as the grass is starting to get really long, and there's an untouched pile of packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of this. It could be nothing, but I feel like no one would go to such lengths to disguise what they were doing with the F party, unless it was something illegal. But would people going to such lengths really forget something as important as locking the front door? Maybe that's what those guys have been arguing about. I really have no idea, and the fact that none of my other neighbors seem bothered by it makes me think I'm involved in some huge conspiracy, or something. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I just have so many unanswered questions. When Damon returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether or not I should just go and straight up ask him